Learned helplessness is a pattern of behavior that keeps you stuck, depressed, and anxious. This video will help you find out if you experience learned helplessness, and if so, what you can do about it. So stay tuned. Buddy, I'm Dr. Hazud and welcome to my channel. In this channel, I talk about all things mental health with the hope to provide education and information. Join me as I dive into different topics every week. If you like the content that you hear, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your feedback is my way of knowing that this is helpful and gives me the fuel to keep going every week with new topics. Learned helplessness is a type of behavior that involves unhealthy response pattern. The main character of this behavior is avoidance. Avoidance of challenges, of negative effects, and inability to problem solve effectively when problems or complications come up. Generally speaking, there are three components that characterize learned helplessness: contingency, thoughts, and behaviors. Let's look into those three components a bit closer. When we look at the world around us, there is a relationship between how we behave and the environmental responses. This is called contingency. So, for example, if I go to school, I'm expecting to get a degree. If I run a race, once I finish, I expect to get a medal. And if I start my car, I'm expecting to hear the engine running. The way in which we understand the world impact not only the way that we think, but also the way we behave. There is a certain relationship between a behavior and the environmental response. What happens with learned helplessness is that we lose this connection between the behavior and the environment. Therefore, we lose the ability to recognize what response we will get in return from the environment. This sense of security of action equals outcome is lost, and in turn, it leaves us in a state of confusion. There is no guarantee that no matter what I will do, I will get consistent results. This becomes really tricky because the way that we understand the world generates our thinking and later leads to our behaviors. In the example I gave earlier, imagine that as you try to start your car, the engine does not always start. So instead it comes on and off whenever it feels like it. There is no real connection between you using the key or parking your car. The car just starts without rhyme or reason. And you cannot trust that the use of the key will generate the result that you're looking for. How much anxiety will that give you, knowing that your car is unreliable? You sit in your car in the morning and you hope it will start so that you can get to work on time. This creates a sense of anxiety and also depression. Thoughts like, will my car start this morning? Or, I hope I will make it to work on time. These could come up for you because you cannot trust that your behaviors will generate what you need. In order to better explain how this behavior was learned, here's a tidbit of history about this theory. This theory started in the mid-1960s when Martin Seligman and Steve Mayer discovered this behavior during experiments they did on dogs. In the experiment, and please, as a real dog lover, do not try this experiment at home, they divided the dogs into three different groups. The first group of dogs were strapped into a harness for a period of time and then released. The second group of dogs were placed in a harness, but they were subjected to electrical shocks that could be avoided if the dogs learned to press the panel with their noses. The third group of dogs received the same electrical shocks as the group number 2, but the difference was that the third group of dogs were not able to control the shocks. The shocks continued at completely random times and outside the control of the dogs. The dogs were then placed in a shutter box, and the dogs from the first and the second groups quickly learned that jumping over a barrier eliminates the shock altogether. But the dogs from the third group did not even attempt to get away from the shocks. This was based on their previous experience where they developed this belief that no matter what they did, they were not able to stop the shocks from happening. What does this all mean for us? And how does this affect our mental health? People who experience learned helplessness feel like they can't trust the world around them. As a result, they may display behaviors such as frustration, feeling passive, having very poor motivation, feeling like giving up, making no effort to help themselves or even ask for help. They often experience low self-esteem and engage in procrastination. It is such an overwhelming thought to believe that no matter what you will do, nothing will change. If that's a thought pattern, why try? It's a very vicious cycle, and that perpetuates feelings of depression and anxiety. People who experience learned helplessness also view problems as a way to validate their view of the world and how unreliable it is. People with learned helplessness don't seek options that they may help them break away from the cycle. In a study that was done, including meta-analysis of literature about learned helplessness, it was found that people experience learned helplessness across all ages, gender, and type of task they engage in. Children as young as 4 displayed the same characteristics as adults who struggle with learned helplessness. The good news, as I mentioned earlier, is that learned helplessness is a learned behavior, which means that it can be adjusted with some new experiences. One type of therapy that has been extremely effective is cognitive behavioral therapy, where individuals with learned helplessness recognize their negative thoughts pattern and how they contribute to their overall feelings. They can then learn to replace those thoughts by engaging in behaviors that challenge the way they think and help them form new beliefs about the world around them. While cognitive behavioral therapy is a form of therapy that requires professional guidance, the first step in understanding learned helplessness is gaining awareness. Start by becoming an observer of your own behavior. Ask yourself if you engage in these kind of behavioral patterns or experience negative thoughts that keep you stuck and leave you in a state of confusion. Learned helplessness can be supplemented with learned optimism, which is a way to help you change your worldview to a more positive view. As I mentioned earlier, the first step is to identify the behavior and your thoughts. The second step is to learn to replace and challenge the pessimistic thought with a positive one. This can be done through careful systemic behavioral interventions that will change the way in which you view the world. Now, a word of caution. I don't like simplifying learned helplessness solutions because the way these behaviors and thoughts show up in our lives and how overwhelming they can be. For example, if you grew up thinking that your bad habits are just who you are and there is nothing you can do about your habits, it can be hard to believe that you can change these habits. Or if you are involved in an abusive relationship and you grew up to believe that violence is just a part of life, this is a type of learned helplessness as well. Being in such a relationship can trigger thoughts such as, I'm worthless without my partner, to the point where you start believing these thoughts and internalizing them and feeling like stepping away from the relationship is going to be impossible. At the same time, I invite you to start with becoming aware and really be open to the experience that you truly deserve more. identifying these limiting beliefs and reframing them in a more optimistic way is possible, and it requires work. How do I become aware? I invite you to think about how you would talk to your friend if he or she called you crying, hurt, in an emotional pain. Will you put them down? Will you call them names? Will you tell them that they are losers anyway? Gosh, I hope not. That will not make you a very good friend. So, if you will not talk like this to your friend, why would you talk like this to yourself? Imagine that you are talking to yourself as if you are a good friend. This is the first step that will help you increase awareness. And hopefully, this step will put you on a path to further self-discovery. So to recap, learned helplessness is a learned behavior about the way that we view the world. It leaves us in a state of distrust, and it promotes and perpetuates feelings of depression and anxiety. Learned optimism is one way to overcome this type of thinking pattern, and the first step to help you become a more optimistic thinker is to become aware. Do that by being a good friend to yourself. I hope that you found something that was helpful for you today. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Help me spread the word and reach out to all those who need to hear this information. Until next time, be well.